Here's Marika Taylor.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for giving us an opportunity to talk about these issues, and also thank them for putting together such a wonderful conference. It's a little bit strange for me, actually. My day job, I should say, is working on diversity issues at the university, faculty, departmental, university level. And so I quite frequently give talks on gender issues, but I've never actually done so to an audience of string theorists. So as Andy said, we've been running a cost action for the last few years. This is the string theory universe. And for those of you who aren't familiar with European funding, cost actions basically provide money for networking via conferences, workshops, and exchange visits. So obviously the main aim of this action was excellent science, but this was an unusual action because it was led by female scientists, it was initiated by female scientists, and one of its aims, going beyond scientific excellence, was to support the development of women. So you can find out more about this action from the website, which is on the Wiseman website. I've been told actually it might be down and being under maintenance for the next few days, but make a note of the link and you can look at it afterwards. You should be able to see here that the leaders of this action were Silvia Panati, who's the chair of this afternoon session, and also Yolanda Lozano, who is here. And I should very much sort of thank them for initiating this and really, leading from the front with this for many years. So as part of this network, we indeed had 3 workshops which were exploring various issues in gender. The first one was in Valencia 2 years ago. There was one in Paris last year, and one was held in Southampton this year. And this is one of the reasons why I'm presenting the session, sort of presenting some of the things that came out of the meeting this year. I'd like to thank a lot of people for having input into this talk and collecting data. So I was actually hoping that this was going to be the first talk at the conference that had data, but Carl Landsteiner beat me to it this morning. I should say it's also kind of wonderful as a string theorist to be dealing with data. So thanks to Anna Ceresoli, Sebastian Fischetti, who's here, Mariana Grania, Gabby Honecker, Yolanda, Marianne Lado, Andy O'Bannon, Silvia Panati, Michele Petrini-Costas for collecting data, providing input. And I'd particularly like to highlight the fact that Andy O'Bannon was the person who initiated the meeting in Southampton. So he really sort of pushed us to hold it there. So the title of the talk is Diversity and Gender, and of course diversity encompasses many issues. So not just gender, but issues of sexuality, issues of gender identity, disability, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, religion. And also these days people think about caring issues. Issues with an aging population are increasingly an issue for many people, people having to care for their parents or other family members. And so, all of these are very important issues. Looking around the room, we can see that our field suffers not just from a lack of women, but from a lack of certain ethnicities as well. Less favored groups often share a lot of issues, but some of the issues are specific to each group. I should say in my own university, we choose to run the gender actions rather separately from these issues so that we can actually focus on the issues which are specific to each group. I would hope that in the long run, the string theory field would actually pick up on some of these issues as well. And it's also important to remember intersectionality. So intersectionality is the statement that we aren't just defined by one characteristic, but by a set of characteristics. And so in particular, if you take a white American Harvard-educated woman, such a person will be typically within the favored group for most purposes. So as I say, the talk today will be focusing mostly on gender issues, traditional gender issues, but the other issues are of course important too. So I'm going to start with sort of talking about the leaky pipeline phenomenon. So many of you will have seen graphs like this. So this is just stolen shamelessly from Google. This is a graph talking about the leaks in the academic pipeline for women. This is coming from America. I think the figures are a few years old, but they haven't changed particularly much. And so if we look at the number of women going into graduate school and then look at how they progress later in their career, we see that the number actually falls, the percentage of women drops as we go on. So women who have children during graduate school, women who get married, are less likely to go on to enter tenure track positions, And as we look further ahead, women are less likely to progress to full professor within a 16-year period. So when you work in diversity issues, as you already see on this plot, people mark various transition points between getting a PhD, getting a tenure track position, and so on. And so there are clearly a number of key transition points. The first in many countries is what kind of high school you go to, what subjects you choose. Then there's the choice of your university course. There's the entrance into graduate school. There's a decision to continue on to postdoctoral research. And then, in our field, I think something that will preoccupy many people in the room is that transition between number 4 and 5, obtaining a long-term tenure track position. So many of you who are in that stage, you often don't look beyond the horizon and think about what happens next. But actually, these days, once you've got the long-term position, that's not the end of it. There's usually a lot of pressure to get grants, to actually keep producing very high-quality research, high-quality teaching, take on leadership responsibilities so that you can progress to full professor. And another transition which is sort of forgotten, so people say, well, you're a full professor, you've made it, is the progression to more senior positions, to become the chair of a department, the director of an institute, the leader of a group, and so on and so forth. So from the perspective of our field, some of these early transitions of choice of high school, choice of undergraduate, one thing that's come up in the discussions over the last couple of years is that there are huge variations. So this was a European project. We had people collected from all around Europe, and we started talking about these things. And you see in the UK, already at the time of undergraduate study, you're down to 15 to 20% women, and that's for all kinds of reasons of early subject choice being made in high school. Whereas in some other European countries, the numbers would be much higher at that point, so they would actually be close to 50% in countries like Greece. So there are huge cultural variations. There are some standard lessons, and there have been studies on this. So I have various links in the talk to, if you want to go away and sort of look for data and look for studies and look for reports. So one of the trends is that women are more likely to go on and continue in physics in a physics department where there are more female staff. That seems to be a pretty robust conclusion in studies in the US and the UK, throughout a lot of Europe. Women are less likely to continue in very competitive environments in which students are ranked against each other, and again, that's discussed in the report here. But certainly a lot of these transitions are not in the direct control of the string theory community. On the other hand, the transitions between PhD to go on to a postdoc and then go into a tenure track position, these transitions are really very much under our control as a community. We collectively make decisions about giving out postdocs. We're very much involved in decisions about tenure track positions. And so my starting question here is, do we have a leaky pipeline? So I showed you a picture of the generic picture of what happens in America, but do we as a community have a leaky pipeline, or do we keep roughly the same numbers between PhD, postdoc, and tenure track? So if we start with a certain percentage of women at PhD level, would you say that the percentage is roughly the same at postdoc and tenure track level, or would you say it decreases? So just as a sort of show of hands, who in the audience thinks that the percentage stays roughly the same between PhD, postdoc, and tenure track? Put up your hand if you think it stays the same. Somebody should be optimistic. Yeah, good, Shiraz. Shiraz is our optimist. And who thinks it decreases? Okay, this is interesting. So I like to have data, so this is one of the things we're going to be exploring in this talk. Okay, so now, once people have the tenure track position, they've gone beyond that horizon, we're back to cultural variations. So one of the things, again, that came up in the meetings is that many of the issues, support for maternity leave, childcare availability, childcare costs, they vary enormously even within Europe, and they need to be addressed locally. They're not really under the control of the string theory community as a whole. At the same time, there are things which are relevant to promotions which are under our control. So, when you sit on promotion panels, things like conference talks, being on organizing committees, being editors of a journal, other measures of esteem in our community are certainly relevant for promotions. So, these days it becomes increasingly important at the university and national level to have realistic plans for dealing with diversity. And as I said, this has been my day job for the past few years. So the way this kind of works is that you set up monitoring and collection of diversity data. Here I really do mean diversity in the general sense, beyond gender. You try and identify issues and analyze causes. You implement action plans to provide support, improve working conditions, in a sense address the causes of any problems. And then you evaluate the impact of your actions. And I should say I myself kind of got stuck at number 1 and 2 in the sense that I didn't think that the quality of the data was good enough and that one needed much better data to actually analyze what was going on, to the extent that I started working with social scientists to actually improve our collection of data. These days, there's very much a carrot and stick approach because it's increasingly common that research councils and governments are requiring satisfactory diversity plans. So this is taken very seriously in the UK because medical research funding is now contingent on this plan. And as soon as your university realizes that they need a suitable plan and they must show progress to actually get medical research funding, they start to take it much more seriously. I should say in Holland also, investment of money into physics over the past few years was contingent on having a plan for dealing with gender issues. Now, we're a little bit unusual, it seems to me, in our community in that we haven't been talking about these issues very much, because if we look at some of the parallel communities in physics and astronomy, they do have quite well-established working groups on gender and diversity. And the type of things they do is that they have sessions in major conferences, they have dedicated websites which collect together useful resources, they have diversity representatives on organizing committees, they monitor gender statistics of fellowships and job applications. In astronomy, they also monitor the gender statistics for telescope time. They provide mentoring, they provide support in the case of harassment. And so if you want to see what good practice actually looks like, let me point you to the astronomers' website. So this is, perhaps can't see it from this very busy web page, but they have collected a huge number of resources and data over many years. And this, I think this committee has actually been in place for maybe 20 or 30 years now. Now, the elephant in the room is diversity actually a problem? And for those of you who think it's not a problem, I'm not going to convince you in a half-an-hour talk. So we're a crowded research field. Jobs are always filled by high-quality candidates, and I think that's one of the reasons why diversity has not been, high up on the agenda. 2 reasons to care. You can go and Google more about these. Increasing diversity changes your culture and attracts students. So for those of you who would like to attract more students at undergraduate and PhD level, this is a good thing to do. And of course, there are many studies that says that increasing diversity improves performance. Profit-making companies are interested in diversity not through the goodness of their hearts, but because they believe it will actually improve their performance. And again, if you're not convinced by these things, I don't expect this talk to convince you, but go and Google, a lot of research articles on this. Okay, so after this preamble, let me talk about the outcomes and the actions of the gender and string theory meetings. So the kind of format that we had was a certain amount of networking between faculty, postdocs, and students. Many of the people attending were women, but not all of them. As you've seen, some of the organizers were actually men. There was an exploration of common issues, potential actions. I should say, as somebody who started in this field close to 20 years ago, it was quite interesting because I'd never actually talked about issues related to gender with anyone in the field, because I've never really been in an institute where there was another woman to talk to. We had input from external researchers from social sciences, and generally a lot of dialogue about the issues. And again, you can find the reports that came from these meetings on this website. So one of the things that came out of the Southampton meeting was that it would be nice to understand what the gender statistics actually are in our field. And so this meeting took place in March. We've had a relatively short space of time to actually look into these statistics. But what we've done since then is collected data on the gender split of faculty, postdocs, and students in a number of countries. So it's France, Germany, Holland, Italy, Spain, the UK, and the US. So this is mostly based in Europe because the project was based in Europe, and then we also looked at the statistics in the US as well. So in social sciences language, this is a cross-sectional study because we just took a snapshot in time. In the future, it would be nice to extend this to more countries and to collect longitudinal data. So longitudinal is when you select a group and you follow them for an extended period. Okay, so 2 graphs here. The left-hand side is the total numbers of faculty, postdocs, and PhD students, graduate students, over these 6 countries. So there's a number of interesting things you can conclude from this, which is that the numbers in our field are in a pretty healthy state. So you see we've got 560 faculty in HepTH spread over those countries, 350 students, and close to 700 PhD students. Okay, so this is just 6 countries. It might scare you in terms of getting permanent positions, looking at the 2 numbers on the left-hand side. The way it's displayed on the left is meant to sort of show you that indeed the numbers who are women, so the left-hand column is the male and the right-hand column is the female. It's meant to display to you that indeed women are in a minority at every career stage. If you plot these numbers on the left as a percentage, you see that we start at about 13% PhD students. It indeed goes down at the postdoc level to 9%, and then it comes back up again to 12% at the faculty level. If we break this down by country, so this is quite a busy graph, and one of the reasons is that perhaps one should not take these statistics too seriously because they do change year on year. But we see that there are some variations between countries. So, you know, at the PhD level, there are some countries where the numbers seem to be a little bit higher. So the percentage seems to be rather higher in Germany. And we can also see on the right-hand side that there are a couple of countries, in particular the Netherlands, where the female percentage is considerably higher. You have to be careful, however, because the small numbers can fluctuate considerably. For example, in the middle column, there's a peak in Spain. The postdoc percentage, number of postdoc percentage females in Spain looks particularly high, but that's actually changed by that will be changed just by having, you know, a couple of extra postdocs. The numbers are sufficiently small. So what can we learn from this data? So this is, as I said, a very preliminary look at the data, but you can already learn some interesting things. So Holland, over the last few years, has run a rather interesting gender initiative. So a number of faculties of science have run competitive tenure track schemes for women. So the criterion was excellent science, regardless of discipline. And the percentage that we see in Holland is actually directly coming out of those schemes. So such schemes, I know, can sometimes be controversial, but you know, Holland was clearly very successful in hiring very successful, absolutely excellent women through these schemes. Somewhat surprisingly, we see that the percentage of women dips at the postdoctoral level and then comes back up at the faculty level. I should say, if you want an absolute normalization of the numbers, the women in HepTH is lower than those in physics as a whole. So from the American Physical Society, I can get that approximately 20% of physics PhDs are awarded to women, approximately 15% of physics faculty are female. So the numbers are a little bit below that. Now, this was just a preliminary snapshot. You need to collect a lot more data from more countries before analyzing the trends in detail. So before one concludes that this drop of sort of from 13% to 9% postdoc is a real one, coming back up again, one actually has to look at more countries. So there are a number of countries where the percentage of women is actually a little bit worse. This is just a sort of snapshot of the faculty numbers. So this is the total numbers. I mean, at the moment, Israel doesn't have a female HepTH at faculty, permanent faculty level. Belgium has only somebody on a part-time appointment. And CERN theory division, so these numbers here actually include all people working in the CERN theory division. The woman over here is actually somebody who's working in phenomenology. So one needs to actually collect together, I think, more information before one can analyze the trends. The data that came from Italy also illustrates one of the points that we said earlier, that I said earlier, which is that one has to look not just at getting a tenure track position, but the progression through the career. So this is the percentage of women in theoretical physics in Italian universities. So at tenure track, assistant professor, associate professor level, it stays approximately constant. But there's a big barrier, it seems, for people to become a full professor in Italy. So we drop right down to 4%. This is a country where the progression to full professor, is not automatic. One has to sort of pass a barrier. Correspondingly, if you look at the statistics for US physics department chairs, approximately 5% are women. Now, one might say, those of you who've done the job, that this is not the most desirable job to do, but it is actually perhaps reflective of the fact that women don't progress to the most senior positions. I should say there's very little study of leadership, female leadership in physics. I'll come back to that at the end. There are also variations by group. I chose to present this, all the statistics will be available to anyone who's interested later on the website, but I present this in a positive way. There are a number of groups which beat the general trends and managed to find a lot of excellent female PhD students. So we see at Harvard, you have over a quarter of the students are actually female. This, I think, is due to the Lisa Randall effect and the Strominger effect. And in general, higher percentages of female PhDs and postdocs are found in groups where there are female faculty. That comes out of our statistics. So what would one like to do to analyze the data? Well, clearly you'd like to know if there really is a postdoctoral level drop, what the reasons are for variations by country and group. But as I said, I'm not going to speculate on those reasons without collecting more data. I should say, even if you're not interested in the gender split, you might be interested in us collecting this data for other reasons. So the demographic trends might be useful. In Germany, the faculty have on average 1.7 postdocs, but in France they have only 0.3. So following those trends and seeing how they change over years might be interesting to people too. There's other gender data that that's interesting to collect. We already collect the gender split of postdoctoral applications made through the Common Application website in Leuven. That's been done for a few years. It would be interesting to look at the representation of women in conferences, organizing committees, seminar series, look at the diversity of journal editorship. As I said, both of the latter two are very relevant in terms of people's career progression. Now, monitoring gender data seems a very passive action, but it's actually surprisingly effective, and that's one thing that we have learned a lot in the UK with diversity plans. So to point the blame at myself, analyzing my own group's data for university reasons taught me a number of things. So firstly, almost all our personal fellowship applications were from men. This is particularly significant for us because 5-year fellowships can be turned into permanent positions, and we've actually made 4 people permanent over the last 4 years. None of our applications were from women. So now we really actively look for women and proactively encourage them to apply. Looking at our own seminar series and workshops, we try to aim that at least 10% of the speakers should be female. That's in line with the statistics of the field. So it's not positive discrimination, it's just in line with the number of women in the field. We also make sure that we circulate our postdoc and PhD openings via mailing lists which are known to actually reach women. We felt that women were actually not aware of openings that there were. So coming out of the cost action is now finished. Going forward, we want to set up a working group on gender issues in string theory, continuing what we've been doing. So we want to keep collecting and analyzing this gender data. So what I presented today was just very preliminary data collected over the last couple of months. We want to promote and coordinate the string theory and gender workshops. We think they've been useful, particularly for early career researchers. We want to get a sustainable web resource collecting all of this data and information together, following the astronomy example. We have a Women in Strings mailing list. This has currently been used by women in Europe, but it would be people from outside Europe would be very welcome to subscribe to it. You can see the subscription here. So what this is used for is announcing positions, conferences, workshops, fellowship opportunities, and it also allows some kind of networking and support for young researchers in that people learn who the senior researchers are, they know who they could go to if they had issues. So in some sense, it leads naturally into mentoring and indeed support if there were issues with harassment. Another thing that came out of the meeting over the last couple of years is the idea of diversity training. So increasingly commonly through Europe, fellowship panels, research grant panels are being trained in diversity. So there's a lot of talk of unconscious biases, biases in recommendation letters, underestimating leadership potential in women, careful use of citations. If you're interested in studies on this, you want to know more what has been done about this, I can recommend to you a book from the Institute of Physics. The book should be available if you log in through any department. You can click and it kind of gives you a review of the literature on gender issues in physics. So more generally, what this group should do is basically provide simple recommendations on actions which are useful in tackling diversity. So one of the things we talked about in the Southampton workshop is just general examples of good practice in hiring. So gender-neutral advertisements, making sure that the advertisements for the job are circulated to all people who are interested. If you have a mailing list which reaches women, use that to actually make sure that you invite women to apply. Bias training for your hiring committees. And an interesting thing which I've been, in a sense, trained to do over the last few years is if you have a candidate who's in unusual circumstances or you think might need a special discussion, so not necessarily a woman, maybe somebody who has a lower publication record because they've had medical issues or personal issues, it's good practice to discuss that person earlier on in the meeting when everyone is actually fresh, to give the fairest assessment of the candidate you can. More recommendations for good practice, so this is good practice in hiring. More recommendations, again, can be found on the website of the COST site. So if you're interested in joining this working group, please contact me. As I said, I'm involved in various social sciences studies, and in particular, I'm currently involved in a study of female leadership in physics. If you're interested in this, taking part in this, being involved in this, again, please come and talk to me in the conference breaks. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika, for this very interesting talk. We have time for probably one comment, one question.
Eliezer?
Over there.
Thank you for this very nice talk. In the year 2001, I actually headed a gender committee at the Hebrew University, and I'm familiar with many of the terms you said, but there is by now a lot of data on what we call the scissor diagram. You called it the leakage diagram. And I'm wondering, why don't you show the how does the angle of the scissors change in time? Because I think that's the relevant parameter. Many of the times when you show the professor situation, it is the supernova of long ago, which exploded. And I think it would be very helpful to see the data. I don't know what it is, on how this angle changes with time, if it does at all.
So that's exactly why I want to see longitudinal studies and to break down this data more, acquire better data, absolutely. Because what you're really trying to see is whether somebody who's an associate professor, have they just become an associate professor or have they been there for 20 years? Absolutely. This is why I'm completely refusing to draw conclusions from the data until I have better data. I totally accept that point, yes.
Okay, sorry, we have to stop. So let's thank Marika and all the speakers of today's sessions.